All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming to our webinar today about the withholding tax for tax year 2024. My name is Kelly Neeson, and I am the supervisor in our Tax Operations Bureau that handles the process returns. Today, we'll be looking at withholding tax specifically. Also with me is Dave Zarin. He will be available and answering your questions within the chat box. So if you have any questions along the way, feel free to enter it in that chat box and he'll do his best to answer in a timely fashion, and his answers should show for everybody to see so you guys can all see each other's questions as well. Now, within a few days after this webinar, a recording will be posted on our training page so you can refer it to others if you have found it useful. And then our contact information will be on the final slide. We're going to review several topics about the Wisconsin withholding tax, which are the WT6 and WT7 forms. We'll go over how to file these forms, as well as how to file the W-2s and the 1099s that should be submitted along with the annual WT7 form. We'll review My Tax Account, our free online filing system, and give you some tips on how to avoid penalties and interest, because above all, we do want to help you avoid that as much as possible. And then we're briefly going to go over how you can close an account and other resources that we do have available. First, let's go over the employer responsibilities. So employers are required to withhold if they pay wages to a Wisconsin resident, regardless of where those services are performed. This does include Wisconsin residents who telecommute. Pay for a non-resident for services performed in Wisconsin, and the employer is engaged in business under Wisconsin law. So for example, let's say you're an employer engaged in business here in Madison, Wisconsin. You hire 2 employees. One is a Wisconsin resident and the other is an out-of-state resident. Both employees are performing services in Madison. So as the employer, you would be required to withhold taxes from their payroll and report that tax to the Department of Revenue. Wisconsin does have reciprocity agreements that could impact your W-2 preparation. For more information on that topic, you can visit our website and search for W-2 preparation guidance. Third-party sick pay, this topic does come up frequently, usually at the end of the year when the W-2s are being issued. Wisconsin does not follow the federal provisions relating to payment of sick pay made by third parties, such as insurance companies. The payer of the third-party sick pay who withholds the actual Wisconsin tax must be the same entity who issues a W-2 directly to the individual that received the sick pay. So, for an example, an employer who pays wages to an individual and withholds Wisconsin income taxes from their paychecks must issue a W-2 to that employee and report the tax to the Department of Revenue. Now, if there's also a separate entity that's the third-party payer of sick plans who also withhold Wisconsin income taxes, they would also have to issue their own W-2 to that individual and report the tax to the department. Wisconsin statutes provide that when a third-party payer of sick pay makes payments directly to the employee, the third-party payer must report and remit that tax withheld, not the employer. For more information on this, you can see our withholding tax publication, which is publication 166. Listed here are the common withholding returns. The WT6 is commonly used to submit withholding tax throughout the year. The WT6 is basically a payment voucher with return characteristics. The due dates of this return depend on your filing frequency, which we will go over in a few slides. The WT7, that's our annual reconciliation of tax withheld throughout the year. It should also include any wage statements you issued. The due date for this return is always January 31st of the following year, unless it lands on a weekend, then it would be due the very next business day. Filing frequencies. So these are set by state statute. Depending on how much tax you're reporting, your frequency may change. Each year, we do conduct an annual scan and review the tax that each entity has remitted over the last 12-month period. These scans are run every November, so the 12-month look back ends October 31st. If you ever need to verify the filing frequency of an entity or a client, you can do so by going to our website at the link provided here and enter the necessary information of that entity. You'll need the ID, meaning the Wisconsin tax account number, the federal ID number, or the Social Security number, depending on how their withholding tax is set up. And you'll also need the business name or the last name, as well as the zip code. Now, as a side note, if you already have access to the entity through My Tax Account, you can easily view their frequency by logging in and just taking a look. As I mentioned earlier, the frequencies are set by state statute and are determined by your annual liability that gets reported. So annual filers are only required to file a WT7. They're not required to file a WT6. Listed here is the breakdown of the different filing frequencies. And as you can see, the more liability you report, the more frequently you'll need to file. The due dates of the returns are due by the end of the following month. The only exception to this would be for semi-monthly filers. Since those returns are due twice a month, the due dates are more frequent. For example, the filing period of January 1st through January 15th would have a due date of January 31st. And the filing period of January 16th through January 31st would have a due date of February 15th. So basically the return is due by the end of the next filing period. And if you have any questions, you can always contact us. The Department of Revenue does have an e-filing mandate in place. This mandate requires filers to submit their returns electronically unless an approved waiver is in place. E-filing does decrease possible errors that come up with paper filing, and it also helps quicken your processing time. The easiest way to abide by this mandate when filing a withholding return is to file your returns through one of these options listed here. First, we have our online filing system called My Tax Account, otherwise referred to as MTA. Next, you have the option to submit your return through an approved XML software transmission. This is an option we offer employers so they can send an electronic funds transfer through our secure internet portal. And then finally, we have our telefile option, which is a way to file your return using a touch-tone phone. This is an automated system that will go through the return line by line and calculate the tax for you as you go. When you file the annual WT7, you must also submit copies of the W-2s and 1099s that were issued. This includes all W-2s reportable to Wisconsin, meaning all W-2s that have Wisconsin tax withheld. You also need to report any 1099s that have Wisconsin tax withheld. You may have 1099s that you need to submit, but they don't have any Wisconsin withholding. These 1099s can be left off of the count on the form WT7 since there's no Wisconsin tax being reported. So for example, if you have 5 1099s that you issued, but only 3 of them included Wisconsin withholding, then the number of 1099s you would report on the annual WT7 would be 3. However, you'd still want to submit copies of all 5 of those. Here's a few tips for the WT7. These first 2 I just mentioned on the previous slide, but still wanted to include them on these list of tips. You want to indicate a count of all W-2s reportable to Wisconsin. Also indicate a count of all 1099s reportable to Wisconsin. 1099 miscellaneous and 1099 NECs, those should be reported on line 2. All other 1099s, such as a 1099K, should be reported on line 3. Also, be sure to check your ACH information periodically if you are paying electronically. Often entities change banks and may not notify their preparer or payroll provider. So as a result, that balance would remain due and then penalties and interest could be assessed, as well as return check fees in some cases if those payments get sent back to us by the bank. So it's a good idea to verify this information to prevent these kinds of payment errors from happening. Here's an example of the 2024 W-2. And then we have a sample of the 1099 miscellaneous form for 2024 and a sample of the 1099 NEC. These are all federal forms and are available on the IRS website if you need to take a look at them. When it comes to the W-2s and 1099s, they can be submitted through XML, through my tax account, or through our EFW2 upload on our website. Paper wage statements are accepted only if you're sending fewer than 10 W-2s or 1099s, and this does include W-2Cs as well. So for example, if you have 7 W-2s and 7 1099s, you can submit them by paper because you have less than 10 W-2s and less than 10 1099s. However, I do still highly recommend that you file those electronically because this would be a faster way to get them processed and cause less issues such as illegible copies or torn paper that could cause a section to be missing. The annual W-2 return and all wage statements, as I've said before, is due by January 31st of the following year. And again, if this day falls on a weekend, they would be due that very next business day. It's an important factor to consider because even though the deadline to file is January 31st, you can submit the returns at any time. You do not have to wait until that last possible day. In fact, I'd highly recommend you file as soon as possible just to ensure that your information is properly received and processed. The 1099-Ks. So the IRS has delayed change in the requirements regarding when a 1099-K must be issued. As of tax year 2023, the reporting threshold associated with Form 1099-K was going to be drastically reduced down to $600 in total payments with no minimum transactions. Due to this delay, the requirement did remain at $20,000 in total payments and 200 transactions for 2023. Now, to phase in the new $600 reporting threshold, the IRS set the 2024 threshold to $5,000. Then in the 2025, the threshold will go down to $2,500. And then finally, they'll finish the implementation of the $600 reporting threshold for tax year 2026. You can read more about this on the IRS website if you need to. Wisconsin accepts the 1099-Ks through our EFW2 process. You can review the IRS publication 1220, that's 1220, for instruction on the formatting. We will also accept the 1099-Ks through our XML submission. And you can find a list of our approved XML vendors on our website. Here are a few tips when it comes to submitting the information returns. So a $10 penalty may be assessed regarding the W-2 and 1099 submissions. If the W-2s or 1099s are not submitted, a $10 missing wage penalty will be assessed for each return. This penalty can also be assessed for wage statements filed late or by paper if they total 10 or more. So to give you an example of this, let's say a business files a W-7 on a timely basis and they report 10 W-2s. If they file the return on my tax account and manually key in those W-2s, there is no penalty assessed because those W-2s were submitted electronically with that return. Now, if the return's filed timely, but they do not submit the W-2s, a $10 penalty will be assessed for each W-2, adding up to a $100 wage penalty. And if they file the return timely, but let's say they don't submit the W-2s until after January 31st, past the due date, they can still be assessed that $100 penalty because they were filed late. And if they file the return timely and send the W-2s in by paper, they would still be assessed that $100 penalty because you can only submit W-2s by paper if you have less than 10. And also I do want to mention income tax refunds for employees or recipients of your W-2s or 1099s. They could be delayed or possibly denied if we do not receive those information returns from the employer or payer. Wisconsin is the first state to conduct employee wage matching against what has been reported by the employer or the payer. So if the recipient files an income tax return claiming withholding tax on a W-2 or 1099, but we don't receive that same W-2 or 1099 from you, the payer, that amount may not be allowed or at least delayed until we receive your copy. Here's a few more filing tips for the W-2s and 1099s. A valid 15-digit Wisconsin tax account number is required in box 15 of the W-2 or in box 17 of the 1099 miscellaneous or box 6 of the 1099 NEC. So for 1099s only, you'd want to use your Wisconsin withholding tax account number even if your withholding account is closed. That account number will help the 1099s get associated to your account without any delay. Now, only if you have never had a withholding account would you use the generic Wisconsin tax account number of 036 followed by 10/8 followed by that 01. However, we do offer a free submission of wage statements on my tax account, which we'll go over in just a few minutes. We no longer accept the PDF files created through the Social Security Administration. So now we're going to touch on some of my tax account filing tips. The first being our standalone entry option for W-2s and 1099s. When you log in to my tax account, you can click on the More tab at the top of your screen here. Then you would click on the section titled W-2 1099 information, which is also highlighted here. This is an option to enter your wage or information returns as a standalone submission, meaning you're not filing a W-7 return along with it. This could mean you've already filed your W-7 return, or you may not have a filing requirement but still need to submit information returns such as 1099s. An example would be a farmer who's not required to withhold taxes but still logs into my tax account to submit the 1099s. Because like I said earlier, even if you have no Wisconsin withholding to report, you may still have to submit that 1099 to us. Once you click on Enter W-2 1099 information, you will follow the steps to submit your information. It will start out asking you to enter the tax year and then whether or not you're entering corrected W-2s or 1099s. Then, for example, if you enter tax year 2024 and click Next, you'll come to this next screen here. You'll notice it's asking for W-2 information first. Entering the information returns follows the same lines as the W-7 return, meaning it starts out asking for the W-2 information, which you can do by clicking on that plus Add W-2s here I have circled in red. Then once you're done entering the W-2s, or if you don't have W-2s to enter, you'd click on the next button here, also circled, to move on to the 1099 option. Then you simply repeat this process until you get to the end of all your information returns and they've all been entered. When entering W-2s, you want to make sure you put the correct Social Security number for the individual. There's a lot of checking going on in the background, and if that information is not correct, it can certainly delay things and may cause some issues or penalties as well. Once you're done entering all your information, it will display a summary page for you to review. And after you click Confirm and Submit, you'll then receive a confirmation number. So now that I've shown you how to do the standalone submission for the W-2s and 1099s, let's go over filing the actual annual W-7. So when you log into my tax account and you click into your withholding account, you'll be brought to this screen here. It'll default to the Periods tab, which you can see at the top of this picture. And in order to file your W-7, you can click on the File W-7 Return, that link for the appropriate tax year. As you can see in this example, there is no File W-T7 return link next to the period of January 1st, 2023, because that return has already been filed. But there is a link next to January 1st, 2024. Once you click on File W-T7 Return, this will be the first screen that you see. It'll first ask if you have any Wisconsin withholding to report. If you do, you'd select yes and indicate how you'll be submitting the W-2s and the 1099s. So you select one of those options, which will be My Tax Account, File Transfer, or Paper, if it's applicable. You have less than 10. Then you'll click Next and follow the instructions to complete the rest of the W-T7 return. When completed, again, you'll receive a confirmation number once that's all done. So now let's go over the W-T6 return, which is a return you can file throughout the year. So these can be filed at any time as long as you submit at least one within each filing period by the due date. It is possible to file multiple W-T7s within a filing period. There's no limit. All you do is simply click on File W-T6 Return. So pictured here is that same picture I used in a previous slide when showing you where to find the W-T7. You'll see both W-T6 and W-T7s are located on this same page. Once you click on File W-T6 Return, it'll bring you to this screen. It'll start out asking if you're filing 0. If you are, you click yes next to that question and then click next down below to get your confirmation number. Because like I said, you want to make sure you still file at least one W-T6 for each period. Now, if you have an amount to report, you'll enter the amount in that required space listed here. And then lastly, it'll ask you if you want to make a payment. If you're not making a payment, then you would click no, and then click next to get your confirmation number. If you are making a payment, then the box is already defaulted to yes, so you simply click next. At the next screen, you'd indicate whether you'd like a confirmation email. This is optional for you, but any request you make in My Tax Account will also be saved in your submission history. Then at the next screen, you choose your payment method, and we have 3 options here. You can make a payment using your bank account information, which will avoid any third-party fees since the payment comes directly from your bank account to the Department of Revenue. You can choose a third-party payer option, such as credit card or PayPal. Since these are processed by a third-party processor, there may be processing fees that apply. Or you can choose to create a printable voucher to mail in a paper check. This option may take a little longer to process since you'll be mailing in the payment. And we always recommend you use one of the electronic payments to avoid any delays. For the sake of this webinar, we're going to choose the option of entering your bank information directly on My Tax Account. So at the next screen, you'd enter your banking information needed. Then you'll get a confirmation number after you click Submit. Something to keep in mind, you are required to file a return even if you have no liability report. So as long as you have an active withholding account, you must file at least one W-T6 for each period. I know I've said that a few times, but that is something that we do want to stress. I also want to point out the notes listed at the bottom of the screen. The first note is informing you that the payment must be submitted before 4 p.m. on the due date to be considered a timely payment. Any payment submitted after 4 p.m. would not be processed until the following night. The second note is giving you the information your bank may need if you have fraud protection. Your bank will need this originator number to allow that payment to be released. There are different originator numbers depending on the tax type you're submitting, but the correct one will always be listed here. And then finally, that last note is advising you that the payment cannot be funded by a bank outside of the United States. Next, I want to show you how to view a summary of your filing history. So to view your summary, we go back to that withholding page in My Tax Account. Remember a few slides ago, we mentioned that the system automatically defaults to the Periods tab when you go into your withholding account. In order to view the summary, you'll need to click on the Returns tab, which I have highlighted in this picture. Now, as you can see, it lists returns that need to be filed as well as returns that can be viewed or amended. For example, if you look at the September 2024 period, it's listed twice. This is because there has been a WT6 filed, which is why you see View or Amend Return. And since you can file multiple WT6 returns within one period, that's why a File Now link is also available. If you do need to amend a WT6, you can always amend the return down if you over-reported. For example, if you accidentally entered the wages instead of the Wisconsin withholding. If you need to report additional tax, you can simply file another WT6. Since you're able to submit as many WT6 returns as you wish, there is no need to amend a return up. So for example, if you're on a monthly filing frequency, but you want to submit a WT6 for each weekly payroll you issue, you can file a WT6 each week instead of waiting until the end of the month to file the entire amount. Just be sure that you're selecting the correct pay period each time you file. Now that we've gone over some filing tips, I want to cover some of the common mistakes that we tend to see. The first one is common when businesses report wage attachments as withholding tax. A wage attachment is a collection action taken within our compliance bureau that directs employers to withhold a certain amount of an employee's wages and remit that to the department. Now, wage attachments should not be reported on a WT6 or a WT7 because it's not tax that you're submitting, it's a garnishment. So there's another area within My Tax Account where you would submit any wage attachments you have to report. Another common mistake we see is when businesses report the federal withholding tax or the DWD, Department of Workforce Development unemployment amount, as the Wisconsin state withholding. Neither of these should be reported to Wisconsin on these withholding tax returns. The last one is not necessarily a mistake, but can delay the processing of your WT7. If you submit your December WT6 payment on the same day you submit your annual WT7 reconciliation, it could delay the processing of that WT7. And the reason for this is because that WT6 payment needs to clear your financial institution before it will apply to your account. And although this is not a requirement, we just highly recommend submitting the final WT6 as soon as possible, or at least a day before you submit the WT7, because otherwise those payments and amounts won't line up when the WT7 is being processed. One of our goals is definitely to make filing tax and paying as simple and fair as possible. We want you to file and pay on time so you can avoid any interest or penalties. And a way to accomplish this is to timely register for a withholding account before you start withholding taxes. If you don't register for an account when you're a new business, we'll eventually figure that out based on the W-2s from your employees when they submit their income tax returns. And then what will happen is we'll create a withholding account for you. And then this would result in late filing fees, penalties, and interest that could have been avoided if you just applied for that and filed your returns throughout that tax year. So for example, let's say you hire a Wisconsin employee and you don't register for a withholding account. That employee files their income tax return along with a W-2 claiming $2,000 of withholding tax. Based on this information, we would set up a withholding account for your business, putting you at a quarterly filing frequency based on the amount of withholding that was reported. This would make all 4 quarterly WT6 returns overdue, as well as the annual WT7 return. So that's 5 periods you'd be assessed late filing fees, penalties, and interest. None of which would have been assessed if you could have applied for a withholding account and filed your returns at the time that tax was collected. Now, if you do try to register using your federal ID number and you get an error regarding that FEIN, give us a call about that error. Sometimes we see businesses will just change one of the numbers on their federal ID number just to make that application go through. but this will cause issues when your W-2s get compared to your federal ID number at the end of the year. So if you get an error when filling out the registration, chances are your federal ID number may already be in our system, and you may have just simply checked a wrong box on that application. Next, as I mentioned earlier, the W-T7 is a reconciliation of what you reported throughout the year on your W-T6 returns. If that W-T7 doesn't match what has been reported throughout the year, meaning you underreported your tax on the W-T6 returns, then an incomplete or incorrect return penalty may be assessed. And again, be sure you submit all your W-2 or 1099s with your W-T7 to avoid that $10 wage penalty for each missing W-2 or 1099. And then lastly, if you don't file a required return, the Department of Revenue will assess an estimate and send out what's called a notice of estimated tax. So it's important that you file the return, which is the best way to take care of that estimate. Here at the Department of Revenue, we do verify filing frequencies on an annual basis to determine if that frequency should change. This review happens every November. However, you can verify your frequency at any time on our website, as I mentioned earlier. This QR code here will take you to our My Tax Account page where you can look that information up. We review the amount of the withholding tax that you've been reporting to see if your frequency now falls within a different threshold. And if we determine that it has, then we would send you a letter in November letting you know that what your new filing frequency will be and that it would take place as of January 1st that following year. If you receive one of these letters, make sure you communicate this to your payroll service provider if you have one, so that the software can be updated with your new filing frequency. When closing a business, you'll need to make sure you file your W-T6 returns through that inactivation date, and you should issue W-2s to your employees. You'll also need to file your final W-T7 return within 30 days of your inactivation date. If you don't file that final W-T7 return, an estimate will be assessed. So normally those W-T7s are due by January 31st of the following year. But again, if you close your business prior to the end of the year, that final return and W-2s are due within 30 days of inactivation. If you do need to inactivate your account, you can contact us and let us know you're closing, or you can inactivate your account right on My Tax Account. If you are a third-party preparer and have access to your client's business, you should also be able to inactivate that account as well. So listed here are some available resources for you. Our Customer Service Bureau offers webinars for the annual My Tax Account filers, which you can find on our website. And there are videos on My Tax Account to assist you in filing and paying your taxes. We also offer several publications available on our website, which are listed here. The common ones for withholding tax tend to be publication 166 and publication 117. So once again, my name is Kelly Neeson. I am the Sales and Withholding Supervisor in our Tax Operations Bureau. And here's my contact information if you need it. I also have listed here the contact information for our Customer Service Bureau. More immediately, but if you feel something needs to be escalated to me, please feel free to reach out to me and I will get back to you as soon as possible. So I hope you have enjoyed this webinar. I thank you again for attending and I hope you guys have a wonderful day.